World War II, it was just this colossal, devastating conflict. But here's the thing, it didn't just pop up out of thin air. Nope, it was more like a long, complicated chain of events. Think of it like a series of dominoes, where each one topples the next. So, let's get into it. Let's trace that chain reaction and see how it all unfolded.
So that's the big question, right? Why did World War II really start? And the answer? Well, it's not just one thing. It was this perfect storm, this toxic mix of bitterness, economic chaos, and just raw ambition that had been bubbling under the surface for more than 20 years.
Okay, so to really get our heads around this, we're going to break it down into 4 key dominoes, you could say. First, the bitter legacy left by World War I. Then, the massive crisis that basically gave birth to Nazism. After that, we'll look at Germany's expansion and how the world just kind of let it happen. And finally, the shocking pact that lit the final fuse for war.
So our story, it doesn't actually start in 1939. We have to rewind about 20 years to right after the First World War ended. Because the very peace treaty that was supposed to end all wars, the Treaty of Versailles, well, ironically, it ended up planting the seeds for the next, even bigger conflict. And man, the terms of this treaty were harsh. First off, Germany had to take all the blame for the war. They called it the War Guilt Clause. Then, they were hit with these insane financial reparations designed to basically cripple their economy for decades. And on top of that, they had to give up a ton of land and cut their military down to almost nothing. This wasn't just a treaty. For Germany, it was a profound national humiliation.
And you can just imagine the psychological effect this had, right? We're talking about an entire country feeling deeply wronged, shamed, and just furious. This created this burning nationwide desire to get their pride back and, tear up the very treaty they blamed for all their suffering.
Okay, so that's the first domino. Now, let's see what happens when you pour gasoline on that fire of resentment, because this simmering anger was about to collide with a total economic collapse, creating the perfect breeding ground for some really extreme political ideas. So, fast forward to the 1930s. The Great Depression hits the world, and it hits Germany hard. Their economy, which was already on shaky ground thanks to those reparations, just completely imploded. I mean, people's life savings vanished overnight because of hyperinflation. Jobs disappeared. Mass unemployment was everywhere. And when people get that desperate, well, they start listening to anyone who offers a way out, no matter how radical.
And that's exactly where Nazism comes into the picture. It was this really powerful mix of ideas that offered a simple, seductive answer to all their problems. The message was basically, we are a great nation, we've been cheated, and all we need is a strong leader to make everything right again.
And this is so important to understand. The Nazi message was like a laser, aimed right at the heart of what the German people were feeling. Think about it. For every single problem they had, the national humiliation, the unemployment, the poverty, the Nazis had a promise, a powerful one. They gave people someone to blame, and most importantly, they sold them a vision of a powerful, proud Germany reborn.
So, once Hitler gets into power, Germany starts to act on these promises, big time. And this next domino is all about Germany's aggression, and a world that for a while at least just kind of stood by and watched. And just look at how quickly this all happens. Right away, Hitler starts rearming Germany, which was a huge, direct violation of the Versailles Treaty. Then, boom, March 1938, he annexes Austria. Just a few months after that, he takes over a big chunk of Czechoslovakia. Every single move was a gamble, basically a test to see if anyone would actually stop him. So, you're probably asking, how did the rest of the world react to this? Well, with a policy called appeasement. See, countries like Britain and France were still haunted by the sheer horror of World War I. They thought, okay, maybe if we just give Hitler some of what he wants, he'll be satisfied, and we can avoid another terrible war.
Yeah, that strategy backfired. Big time. Instead of calming him down, it was like a green light. It signaled weakness. Every time they gave in, Hitler just got more confident, more aggressive, and more convinced that nobody had the guts to stand up to him.
All right, this brings us to the final moves on the chessboard, the ones that tipped the world into war. Hitler had just one last big obstacle he needed to deal with before he could finally launch the massive war he'd been planning all along. And what happens next is just mind-blowingly cynical. In August 1939, two ideologies that were supposed to be mortal enemies, Nazi Germany and the Communist Soviet Union, signed a peace pact. It stunned everybody. But what the public saw was just a cover story.
The real deal was a secret agreement to basically split Poland and the rest of Eastern Europe between them.
From Hitler's point of view, this was a brilliant strategic move. It meant the Soviet Union, his biggest threat to the East, was suddenly off the table. So now he could invade Poland without worrying about fighting a war on two fronts at the same time, which is, a military nightmare he absolutely wanted to avoid.
With that pact signed, the path was clear. On September 1st, 1939, German tanks rolled into Poland. And that was the final domino. This was the one act of aggression that was just too big to ignore.
Just 2 days later, Britain and France had to make good on their promise to protect Poland. They declare war on Germany. And just like that, the Second World War had begun. So let's just quickly run through that chain reaction one more time. It all kicked off with the resentment from that harsh Versailles Treaty. That resentment was then set on fire by a massive economic crisis, which paved the way for Nazism. The Nazis' aggression was met with that failed policy of appeasement which just encouraged them more, leading straight to the invasion of Poland, the final spark that started a world war. Understanding this whole domino effect is so important. It really shows how this dangerous cocktail of injustice, economic desperation, and just bad diplomacy can spiral into a global catastrophe. And it leaves us with a really big question, doesn't it? If we really study these causes, can we get better at spotting the warning signs today and maybe, just maybe, stop history from repeating itself?